The wind howled like a wounded animal, clawing across the barren plains of Dry Creek Valley. Dust spun in angry circles, chasing shadows that had long since disappeared. A worn path, half buried beneath sand and neglect, led toward a flicker of smoke in the distance. That's where she was headed. Clara May didn't talk much. Not because she couldn't, but because she'd learned long ago that words rarely saved anyone. Her boots, cracked and silent, carried her through the storm with grim determination. Her face, hidden beneath a faded shawl, was gaunt with travel, her eyes the kind that didn't ask for mercy. On her back, she carried a bundle wrapped in oilskin, a skillet, blackened from years of fire. Nothing else. The sign she passed was barely legible: Dry Creek Ranch. Help wanted. It hung crooked on a fence post that had lost its fight with the wind. She stared at it for a beat, long enough to catch her breath and taste the grit between her teeth, then trudged forward toward the barn in the distance. Inside the ranch house, Silas Granger leaned over a table scattered with bills and bad news. He was a man carved from hard years, tall, unshaven, shoulders stiff from old wars and older regrets. His fingers traced the words on a torn envelope. Another letter from the bank. Another reminder that the land was dying beneath his feet, and the cattle weren't far behind. Still, pride had kept him from closing the ranch, if only because burying a thing you loved was harder than starving with it. The knock came once. Then silence. He opened the door, expecting dust or a snake or nothing at all. But she stood there, framed in dusk, holding the skillet like a holy relic. "I cook," she said, voice flat, eyes unwavering. Silas blinked. "That right?" She nodded once. Said nothing more. "You got a name?" No answer. He looked past her at the fading sun, then back at her hollow cheeks and blistered hands. "You don't say much." "No need to," she murmured. "If the food's good." He gave a dry, humorless chuckle and stepped aside. "Kitchen's through there. Let's see if your silence is worth my firewood." Clara moved with practiced certainty. She didn't ask where things were, just opened cabinets, sniffed spoiled flour, found a half sack of beans, 2 onions, and a strip of salted meat. The pot clanged once, and then all that remained was the sound of water boiling and the faint scrape of a knife on wood. Silas watched from the doorway, arms crossed. She didn't look at him, didn't seem to care that he was there. Just stirred, poured, and tasted, like each motion was part of a ritual passed down through suffering. The smell hit first, onions caramelizing, meat searing, something hearty rising from the ashes of despair. He hadn't eaten real food in weeks. Not since Mary died. Not since everything started slipping away. She served him in silence. A bowl, a spoon, nothing more. He took one bite, paused, then took another. And another. It was simple. But it tasted like memory. "You're hired," he muttered. Clara gave the slightest nod and turned back to the sink. That night, the house creaked with wind, but for once, not with emptiness. Silas sat by the hearth, staring into flames. She slept on a cot by the kitchen, curled into herself, her skillet hung like a sentinel by her side. He didn't ask her anything else. Not where she came from. Not who she lost. The way she moved, the way she worked, those things spoke louder than stories ever could. But the questions still burned. By morning, Clara was up before the rooster. She milked the stubborn old cow, boiled water from the well, started bread from scratch. Silas walked in half awake and found the kitchen full of smells that tugged at something long buried. He grunted a greeting, she handed him coffee. No words exchanged, but something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or simply survival. Over the next few days, the rhythms formed. Clara worked like she'd always belonged there, mending clothes, cataloging supplies, even repairing the old pantry door with a single nail and a rock. Silas tried not to watch her too closely, but he couldn't help it. There was something in her quiet, something fierce and unreachable. At the general store in town, word traveled fast. You heard Silas hired a girl. Not a girl. A woman. Real quiet one. Crazy, probably. Or running from something. Silas ignored the gossip. The town didn't care much for his ranch or his silence. They hadn't shown up when the raiders burned his north pasture. They hadn't helped him bury Mary under the cottonwood tree. He owed them nothing. But Clara, she didn't talk, and she didn't run. That meant something. Still, unease lingered. One night, he found her outside near the barn, staring at the horizon with her back to the moon. "You expecting someone?" he asked. She didn't answer. "You been in a fight before?" She turned slightly, moonlight catching a faint scar across her jawline. "Enough to know when one's coming." That was all she said. Then she walked past him and back into the house, barefoot and unafraid. Silas stared into the dark, suddenly aware of how quiet the night had become. He didn't know her story, not yet. But he could feel the edges of it. Like a wound that hadn't scabbed over. Something burned her once, burned her deep. And in the ashes, all she kept was that skillet and her silence. What he didn't yet know was how much she was willing to fight to keep what little peace she'd found. Or how soon the storm she sensed would arrive, and test them both. And just beyond the ridge, unseen by either, 3 riders paused under a canopy of trees. Dirty coats. Sharpened eyes. Greed in their bones. They had seen the woman. And they had plans. The wind picked up again. And the valley waited. The days folded into each other like well-worn pages, stitched with the kind of silence that didn't beg to be broken. Clara became part of the land in the way the wind did, always present, mostly unseen. She mended the broken hinges of the chicken coop with twine, lined the pantry shelves with dried herbs, and chopped wood with a precision that startled even Silas. Her presence, though quiet, had gravity. Things stayed where she placed them. Meals arrived on time. The animals stopped pacing in the barn at night. Something about her steadied the place. Silas noticed. Not with words, but with gestures. He left a new pair of gloves for her by the door when the frost crept in. He fixed the creaky hinge to her room. Small things. She noticed too, and though she never said thank you, her eyes lingered on him just a second longer each morning. It was something. But no peace on the frontier lasted long. One evening, as the sky burned pink over the valley, Silas rode back from town with his brows drawn tight and his rifle across his back. Clara was pulling water from the well when she heard the hooves. He didn't speak until they were inside, and even then, his voice was tight as wire. "They hit the Jenkins place," he said. "Burned it down. Took the goats. Left nothing but smoke." Clara stirred the stew once, twice, then stopped. "How many?" she asked. 3, maybe 4. Fast riders. Got no faces. Just threats." Clara nodded, but her shoulders tensed. Silas sat at the table and exhaled slowly. "They are moving closer. Won't be long before they try here." There was a beat of silence before she turned, setting down the spoon. "Then we don't wait." That night, Clara walked the perimeter of the property, eyes low, fingers tracing the fence posts. She examined the earth like it whispered to her, noting where boots had crushed soft grass, where fresh tracks hadn't yet filled with windblown dust. She mapped in her mind how the intruders would approach, and where they would fall. She didn't sleep. The next morning, Silas found traps hidden beneath the brush, simple snares made with copper wire and thorns, set in just the right places. He crouched beside one, lips curling at the edges. "You've done this before." Clara, up in the hayloft tossing down feed, paused mid-throw. "Once or twice." "You military?" "No." "Outlaw?" "No." "Then what?" She climbed down, brushed the hay from her shirt, and stared at him flatly. "Widow. War widow." He didn't press further. A week passed, then another. They worked side by side, often without a word exchanged for hours. Yet, in the hush between footsteps and hammer strikes, trust formed, wordless and unspoken, like roots beneath hard ground. One evening, when the wind dropped low and the sky dimmed early, Clara brought out a small bundle wrapped in waxcloth. Inside were dried flowers, faded letters, and a metal pin bearing the shape of a broken eagle. "My husband died at Cold Harbor," she said simply. "Union man. Cooked for his company. I did too, after the fire." Silas looked at the bundle, then at her. That how you got the scar? She nodded. Raiders torched the camp while we were feeding children. They didn't care whose side we were on. A silence thick as smoke fell between them. I buried my boy with a wooden spoon in his hand, she whispered. He used to follow me around, begging to taste the stew. Silas swallowed, hard. Mary, my wife, she used to sing while she worked. One morning, she went out to check the line fence. Never came back. We found her 2 days later. Trampled. Bandits took the horses, left her in the creek. He had never told anyone that. Not even the preacher. That night, they didn't speak again. But they sat by the fire longer than usual. The silence was no longer empty, it was full of names they no longer said out loud. 3 nights later, Clara saw the first sign. A black feather stabbed into a fence post near the north line, a crude symbol carved into the wood. She didn't wait. She moved like smoke through the barn, gathered herbs, ash, and bone, and painted a symbol back, one she said meant asterisk, not pray. Asterisk. Silas watched her from the shadows, unsure whether to be afraid or in awe. The next evening, someone left a wrapped parcel on the stoop, rabbit meat, skinned clean. No footprints. No sound. Silas narrowed his eyes. Who? Clara looked into the trees. Not an enemy. From then on, the signs came often. A small leather pouch of dried root. Fish laid by the creek. Once, a hawk feather wrapped in cedar bark. Clara responded with salt, wild onions, and tobacco leaves. They were communicating with someone who never showed his face. Silas finally asked, You know him? No. But I think he's watching the same fire coming our way. That fire arrived with a broken fence and smoke on the southern ridge. Clara spotted it first, 2 riders, pacing just out of range. One had a rifle, the other carried a whip coiled at his hip like a rattlesnake. Silas cocked his shotgun. Tonight. Clara didn't answer. She was already moving, salting the windows, closing the shutters, burying dry powder beneath the stairs. Her eyes didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She moved like someone who had lived through fire and didn't plan to burn again. As the sun vanished, shadows grew teeth. They heard them circling. Laughs in the dark. A whistle, low and mocking. Then the first stone hit the window. Silas raised the gun, finger on the trigger. You sure about this? Clara's voice was steady. No. But I'm done running. Just before the door cracked open, a howl pierced the silence. Not a wolf, something older, human and wild, rising from the trees like vengeance. The bandits paused. From the tree line came the flash of steel and the silent rush of shadow. One man cried out. Another fired. Chaos erupted. Clara opened the door and stood on the porch, holding her skillet in one hand, a torch in the other. Through the flames, Silas saw a figure, tall, cloaked, face painted in ash, pulling one of the riders from his horse and vanishing into the dark. The ranch was still again. They stood side by side, breathing hard, hearts racing. Then, Clara whispered, almost reverently, "He's not an enemy. He's the fire they should fear." And with that, the night swallowed the trees once more. The morning after the ambush was eerily calm, like the land had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Smoke lingered faintly where torches had scorched the grass, and blood, old and fresh, streaked the dirt by the fence. The bodies were gone. No one saw who took them, but the trail vanished into the forest like it always did when he passed through. No tracks, no noise. Only the hollow thrum of mystery in the air. Clara moved through the yard with the same poise she carried into battle, quiet, efficient, purposeful. She gathered spent shells, swept broken glass, and reset the traps. Her skillet, once used for stew, now bore a fresh dent from the skull of a man who dared step through her doorway. Silas didn't offer to help. He simply followed her lead, shoulders heavy, face unreadable. Later that day, Silas found her by the creek, kneeling beside the water with her hands submerged. He watched her from a distance, not wanting to interrupt. She wasn't washing blood or cleaning clothes. She was still, utterly still, like the weight of the past had finally settled across her back. A gust of wind pushed through the trees, bending the cottonwoods just slightly. "You did more than I ever expected," he said, voice low. Clara didn't look up. "I've done worse for less." He nodded slowly and sat on a rock nearby. For a while, they said nothing. Just listened to the babble of the stream, the distant cluck of chickens back at the barn, and the whisper of leaves brushing against each other like secrets. Then Clara spoke again, not to him but to the water. "I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, the world might forget I was there. That maybe grief would grow bored and move on." Silas stared at her hands, scarred, calloused, knuckles raw from a fight they hadn't asked for. "It doesn't move on," he said. "It just grows roots." Her eyes flicked to him, just once. "Then I'll plant something better in its place." That night, Clara pulled out a small linen sack she'd kept hidden in the bottom of a drawer. Inside were seeds, wrapped in old paper, labeled in ink faded nearly invisible: tomatoes, sage, corn, sunflowers. She stepped into the yard, found a patch of ground untouched by fire or blood, and began to dig. Not with haste or desperation, but with care. One row at a time. Silas brought her water. Neither of them spoke. The dirt didn't need words. The next few days passed in wary peace. The town heard about the attack but sent no one. No sheriff rode out. No preacher stopped by. Whatever happened on Silas Granger's land was his own affair, and most folk knew better than to tangle with ghosts and widows. But one visitor returned. Clara sensed him before she saw him, just a shadow in the woods, watching from a place beyond light. She didn't flinch. Instead, she placed a plate of food on a tree stump by the fence line: salted rabbit, wild greens, cornbread. Then she turned her back and walked away. When she returned an hour later, the plate was empty and beside it sat a carved wooden figure, a small bear, rough-hewn but steady, with a symbol etched into its chest. Silas examined it that night beneath lantern light. "Means guardian," he said. "Used to ride with scouts. Saw that mark once near Fort Mason." Clara ran her fingers along the wood, her eyes distant. Then his watching still. The next morning, Silas found her sketching something in the dirt with a stick, lines, arcs, arrows. A defense plan. He crouched beside her. "We already won," he said. She shook her head. They weren't the only ones watching. And she was right. Just after dusk, a letter arrived, delivered by a trembling boy no older than 13. It wasn't signed. The handwriting was jagged, like it had been scrawled mid-flight. *, we don't forget. The woman owes blood. Next time, we take the ranch. *. Clara read it, burned it, and went back to cooking like nothing had changed. Silas, however, stared into the fire that night for hours. Finally, he spoke. "You could leave. There's still time." "I'm not running." "It's not about pride." "I know." "Then why stay?" Clara looked up, eyes shadowed but steady. "Because something here is mine now. And I'm tired of losing." That answer settled like stone. They prepared together this time. Reinforced the barn with timber from the creek. Dug new pits, refilled the traps, restocked ammunition. Clara taught Silas how to make smoke bombs from vinegar and sulfur. He taught her how to reload faster. They trained in silence, but not in distance. They were no longer strangers on the same path. They were two survivors, rebuilding something from the ruin of everything. When the attack came, it wasn't loud. It began with a fire on the far field, meant to draw them out. But Clara didn't take the bait. She waited until the second rider crept toward the kitchen window, and then she struck, iron pan to the skull, swift and without mercy. Silas took down the third from the hayloft, one clean shot. The last man ran screaming into the woods, only to find Wire waiting. None of them came back. In the aftermath, Silas leaned against the porch rail, watching the horizon. Clara stood beside him, arms crossed, a smudge of ash across her cheek. "I was wrong about you," he said. Clara raised an eyebrow. "You talk just fine. With your hands. With food. With fury." She allowed a faint smile, rare and real. Words are overrated. He nodded. Then let this one stand, stay. She didn't answer at first. Just stared at the trees, at the garden starting to sprout, at the broken fence they had yet to fix. Then, softly, I don't talk much, mister. But I can stay, if you'll have me. His answer came not with words but with the quiet gesture of placing another chair beside his, ready for the next dusk, the next fight, the next bowl of stew. As the sky bled gold across the valley, the ranch no longer felt hollow. The wind still whispered, but now it carried something gentler, something like home. And from deep in the forest, the guardian watched. Silent, present, eternal. The rains came late that year, painting the valley in silvers and grays. It wasn't the harsh kind that scoured the earth, but a slow, steady curtain, softening the edges of cracked wood, coaxing green from the brittle soil. Clara stood on the porch, arms folded, eyes cast toward the garden she and Silas had fought so hard to protect. Tiny green stalks pushed up through the dark earth. The life she'd planted was taking root. Silas joined her, boots thudding across the planks. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, black and hot. No words passed between them. None were needed. The quiet had become comfortable, like a shared language between two souls that had already said all there was to say through fire and survival. The ranch was quieter now. The fences repaired. The barn restocked. No signs of riders in weeks. But still, Clara never fully relaxed. Her eyes scanned the horizon at least twice each morning. Old habits, born from scars too deep to name. A letter arrived by horseback courier that afternoon, stamped with a red seal, one Clara hadn't seen in years. She turned it over, thumb grazing the edge before setting it on the table untouched. Silas glanced at it but said nothing. He trusted she'd tell him if it mattered. That night, by lantern glow, she opened it. The letter was from a northern agency, an official clearinghouse for wartime records and citizen reports. After almost 5 years, Clara's name had been cleared. They called it a clerical mistake. A misfiled accusation. A forgotten witness who'd finally come forward. She was no longer wanted. She was, on paper at least, a free woman. But freedom felt like smoke in her lungs. Too long breathing dust, too long running. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it away in a drawer. It changed nothing. Her silence, her fight, her strength, none of that had come from a government's mercy. It had come from choosing to survive when the world insisted she fade. The next day, Silas found her by the creek again, kneeling like before, only this time she wasn't still. She was building something, small stacks of river stone in circles. It wasn't for protection or defense. It was ritual. He didn't interrupt. Just watched. Later that night, she told him it was her son's birthday. I used to make him peach bread, she said. He'd eat the top crust first, say it tasted like sunshine. Silas didn't respond. He just left and came back an hour later with a jar of preserved peaches from the cellar, long forgotten behind jars of lard and pickled eggs. She didn't cry. But she sliced the fruit, mixed the flour, and baked quietly. When the smell filled the house, Silas sat beside her at the table, knife in hand. They each took a piece. The crust was crisp. The inside, soft and warm. He looked at her and said, "Tastes like sunshine." Her lips trembled, just slightly. And then she nodded. In the following weeks, strangers passed through the valley, families migrating westward, cattlemen seeking land, travelers chasing rumors of gold. A few stopped at Dry Creek Ranch, asked for water, for directions, for shelter. Clara watched them carefully. She didn't trust quickly. But she never turned anyone away empty-handed. She became a presence in the land, half myth, half woman. Locals in town whispered about her. That's the cook who took down 3 raiders with a skillet. She doesn't speak much, but her food'll stop a man's heart with feeling. Granger's place? Don't go there unless you're clean in soul and quiet in step. None of that mattered to Clara. She planted. She cooked. She watched the skies. She stayed. One evening, Silas brought in an old map, rolled and cracked with time. He spread it across the table between them. There's more land down south, he said. Streams, game, good soil. We could try herding again. Expand. Clara traced the border with one finger. That means leaving this house. Silas shrugged. Doesn't have to. But it means building. She nodded slowly. Then looked up. Then we build. The seasons began to change. Spring whispered through the grass, waking the earth. Calves were born. Rainstorms fed the new crops. The ranch, once a husk of memory and ash, began to pulse with life again. Not busy life, not loud, but real. One afternoon, Clara stood at the edge of the pasture and saw him again, Wire, the guardian. He stood beneath a cedar tree, eyes on her. She raised a hand. He didn't move. Just watched. Then, in a quiet swirl of leaves, he was gone. She turned back to the house, the place she never thought she'd call home. And for the first time in years, she felt it, not just shelter, not just safety. Belonging. As dusk settled, she lit a fire in the hearth. The scent of stew filled the walls, her own recipe, not borrowed from memory, but created here, in this place. She placed 2 bowls on the table. Silas entered, wiping mud from his hands. He sat, looked at the steam curling from the bowl, then at her. I don't talk much either, he said softly. Clara smiled faintly. Then let the stew speak for us. They ate in silence. Outside, the wind moved gently across the valley, brushing against the garden, the fences, the stones by the creek. Life, after war. Roots, after fire. Stew, after sorrow. And in that quiet room, 2 broken people built something whole, not with words, but with time, with grit, with the kind of trust that only forms when everything else is stripped away. Their story wouldn't make headlines. It wouldn't ride through town on banners or ballads. But for those who passed through and stayed a while, they'd remember. The ranch with the quiet cook. The man who listened. The fire that didn't burn them, but warmed. And in the final voiceover, as the screen faded to black, Clara's voice returned, steady and sure. I don't talk much, mister, but I can stay. And I can cook. A pause. A crackle of the fire. If that's enough for you, it's more than enough for me. On-screen text. ****. If this story stirred something in you, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more tales from the forgotten edge of the frontier. ****. Because sometimes, the ones who speak the least leave the deepest echoes. ****.